All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Brown. I'm the administrator for the Division of Plant Health and Compliance with the Nevada Department of Agriculture. Today we are hosting an in-person in our Sparks office and virtually the start of our 2026 Mormon Cricket public meetings. In the Sparks office, we have Bryant McDowell, who is our state entomologist, Curtis Irwin and Jennifer Cleus with the entomology department. We have both Peter Rockerman and Jordan, and I'm going to destroy your last name, so I apologize, Jordan, with our APHIS PPQ partners. I'm going to give a little bit of a rundown and expectations for the meeting, and then we will receive two presentations, one from our state entomologist and one from our partners in APHIS. And then we'll move into a question and answer period based on those presentations. And then there'll be an availability for general public comment, and then we will close the meeting. So again, these are our annual Mormon Cricket and Grasshopper meetings for the Nevada Department of Agriculture and APHIS. Annual meetings for the Nevada Department of Agriculture and APHIS to be able to present on our Mormon Cricket and Grasshopper program. The Nevada Department of Agriculture works through an agreement with our federal partners to implement the Mormon Cricket and Grasshopper program here in Nevada. So first, I'll turn it over to our state entomologist, who will go through his presentation. We'll hold questions after. So we'll do both a presentation from NDA and then APHIS, and then have any question and answer period during that time. Again, the goal of this meeting is to set expectations related to the Mormon Cricket and Grasshopper program, as well as provide some educational background on Mormon crickets in general and sort of what happened in the previous years of the program. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with switching slides. Are we switching slides, Bill? So why are we here? Our focus, India's focus, right, as far as protecting rangeland, crops, and public safety when it comes to Mormon cricket outbreaks. So we're going to talk a little bit about things that maybe would affect outbreak numbers, what changes, weather patterns, and then how we utilize the public, how the public can comment, report, and help our true efforts in participating with our survey data. QR codes. Ooh, I'm clicking through too quickly. All right, so what is a Mormon cricket? Not a cricket, right? Not sure if everyone has heard of this complete history. So I did a lot of background work into the Mormon cricket and got fascinated. Saddleback katydids is what they are truly, I guess, referred to as. So if you look on the back behind the head and see this intense saddle-like structure, that's called the pronotum. So that's kind of how you can characterize these from other crickets, grasshoppers. So it's a flightless shieldback katydid. Again, built for walking. They're not great flyers. In fact, these are wingless. They can never form wings as adults. Because they're such great walkers, they have such a robust body built for walking. They will form these migratory bands, right? And then we have these outbreaks. I've got a couple of pictures later on in the presentation. But I'm sure if you're in that area, you have witnessed this. Everything else aside, this was my first Mormon cricket season, so I'm quite excited. I've never actually seen this in person, so I know it can be terrible, but also fascinating for someone in my field, right? So why do we care? Multiple reasons. When it comes to public safety, roads, buildings being covered, the smell, the noise. Like I said, it's my first Mormon cricket infestation, but I smell piles of dead insects, and it's not pretty. So native habitat, right? They're from here. They've always been here. Great Basin area in the mountain western states. Our hotspots are going to be in the sagebrush fork rangeland. We have this conflict, right, where when the population increases and we start building into these rural habitats, we're kind of invading into those natural areas. And so we end up encountering more of these outbreaks, more of these infestations, whether it's Mormon crickets or any other wildlife, right? So most years, you've got a low density, and we're talking, in comparison from these Florida outbreaks, a low density resident population that's always there and native. They are an annual, uh, uh, I'm not trying to say, they've got one generation per year, right? So you've got every year coming out. In outbreak years, they're going to form those migratory bands. Those can dominate landscapes. Oftentimes, if there's barriers, they're going to travel along those barriers as well. Band movement is, there's a lot of things affecting where that band is moving, a lot of variables there. It's suggested that it's partly driven by nutrition needs. So once you have all of these nymphs that have eaten up all the vegetation in an area, those later adults are going to need a food source, right? So they have to move to find food. In addition to that, whenever they are, getting injured or dying off, or maybe they're not moving quick enough, right? They are going to be cannibalized by those behind them. So you kind of have this pressure to keep moving, keep moving, keep moving in order to survive. Okay, so real quick on the life cycle, these are parametabolous or hemimetabolous insects, so they don't have a full life cycle, like let's say a butterfly, okay? So the female's gonna lay eggs into the soil, those overwinter. Typically for a year, they can be extended up to a decade, I've seen. They'll hatch in the spring whenever the soil is going to warm. You've got kind of a gradient of hatchers at these lower elevations. And then as we move on through the season, you're going to see more individuals hatching the higher up you go. They've got 7 nymphal instars. Nymph, just to think of it as an infant or a baby insect. The instar is the stage itself. So they hatch into a first instar, second, third, fourth, fifth. You may be asking, why do we care? But this does play into when treatment efforts occur. So studies have shown, right, if you apply things too early, younger instars, for example, will not accept those baits. If you apply it too late, then you're not hitting enough of the population. Your efforts may not be worth it, right? So after they reach adulthood, they're going to mate. The females will again lay the eggs into the soil. You can see on this photo here, we've got this long ovipositor extending off the back of that adult grasshopper right there. So she's going to stab that into the soil, lay her eggs. They're nice and protected from predators and the elements. And whenever favorable conditions occur, they will hatch, and that cycle repeats. So just historical outbreaks in Nevada, and I kind of copied this over from some of Jeff's old slides, but you can see we've got a great record of our historic outbreaks. This most recent one occurring, it was 2019, 2018, 2019. So it's my understanding that we're on the downside of this current outbreak, which is nice to hear. It's good that I guess I'm not thrown to the wolves in that complete outbreak here, right? Okay, so what are some variables contributing to an outbreak? When I put on here triggers are not fully understood, it's not that it's not understood, it's just that there are so many variables at play here. And weather patterns are one of those. Often going to be drought associated, or if you get more moisture than normal, that can also contribute to a downfall in the population. It's all going to align with the food dynamics as well, the availability of resources. Outbreaks can persist multiple years, sometimes over a decade. So what are the impacts of those outbreaks? Obviously, rangeland. These crickets have a broad diet, so they're going to feed on a lot of things. They can damage crops completely, very quickly. And then public safety, I've heard most about this when I finally saw an image of a snowplow taking Mormon crickets off the road, I thought that was very impressive. It's not something I've ever heard of. It's very niche, but it can cause slicks, right? So there's a hazard there that needs to be addressed. We were just in a meeting recently where a grad student had done brake tests to see that it was like slicker than ice, I think it was. And then just a general nuisance, right? Nobody wants insects all around, especially if they're covering, your home. Um, I've been in instances of other insects where you've got an outbreak and it's not fun. So as far as natural enemies, things that are normally, keeping the native pests at bay, there's no true like specific specialist predator. Lots of avian species. In the literature, you see gulls coming up, blackbirds and raven, lots of rodents, coyotes, even. As far as parasites go, and I see this a lot in the orthopterans, so the grasshoppers, katydids, you can even see it out into praying mantids. Maybe you've seen the videos of someone putting them in the water and you've got these nematodes kind of coming out of them. So there are hairworms that will infect Mormon crickets. In the literature, they describe different types of tachinid flies, parasitic wasps. These are mostly going to be affecting the nymphs and eggs. And then pathogens, microsporidia, fungal infections, orthoptines in general are going to be affected. Like I mentioned, a high moisture year will have a higher mortality of fungal pathogens in that year. We see a lot in like black field cricket outbreaks in Texas, where I'm from. That's where most of my experience with adoption is going to be. So as far as control methods, timing is everything, right? When you are applying, and this is, I'm going to be referring mostly to baits right here, and not just the application of pesticides, but pest suppression window is going to be as early instars, like I mentioned, third, fourth, fifth instars. The later instars in adults are going to be harder to suppress. Obviously, you have these bands, like anything, right? As it grows, it gets more robust and able to combat, whether it be pesticide exposure, predators, whatever. Their bodies are a little bit thicker. It can be harder to penetrate, for example, with chemicals. And then the practical implication of, getting people out to do surveys, availability of staff. The treatment decision needs to be made early on in order to kind of have all of the backlog things move into place in order to get people out into the field. So when it comes to homeowners, prevention is going to be key, but there are some landscape modifications that you can do. Reduce attractants, whether it's going to be like host plants, for example. You want to protect those high value areas, things like your garden beds, of course, maybe even sidewalk areas. As far as mechanical exclusion goes, got this in here for homes and gardens. We're going to talk about slip barriers on the next slide, but I also want to mention just making sure that your normal integrated pest management tactics are in good repair. So things like door sweeps, your window screens, window sills, making sure there's no cracks in those. These things like to climb, and so if there's any sort of hole or thing they can get into, that's how they're going to gain entry indoors. Chemical suppression, of course, we'll talk about what the homeowner can do versus what our program does. And then the biological realities. Again, there's not really any specialist enemies. Of course, they play a role in reducing the population, but that's needed. So again, for homeowners, we talk about the temporary slip barrier fencing. That can be good to just kind of move hordes away from areas that you really do want to protect. Vacuum cleanup efforts. If you have a lot of die-off, especially you don't want that there, vacuuming that, bagging it and disposing of it is a good way to just get it out of the area. I know that it's not practical for all the things, but I live in an apartment and I have a shop vac, so get it. And then fall soil disturbance in gardens. So this is in order to expose the eggs that have been laid by females that spring before. A lot of times in Grasshopper cricket management, this is a really good technique for just small scale. I know not everybody has some sort of garden tiller, but it does help to take care of a couple of the, not full millions of eggs, right? But to reduce the population to some extent. So what we do, I'll go over our baiting treatments. The baiting treatments are only going to occur with land. Aerial treatments, if they do occur, will be on public land as well. It could be private. There's a cost share agreement that goes along with that. We do not give out any baits or handouts to the public for baits, but those are commercially available. We did or were interested for your property. So APHIS and NDA will treat alternating swaths to reduce pesticide load. And just talking about full area that we're treating instead of treating the entire area. And I think we're going to hear more on this in Jordan's presentation about what goes into the why behind it. One treatment per year per area. So this is whether it's we've got aerial treatments or the bait treatments going on. If one treatment occurs in one spot, it's only going to be done that one time. And then the product choice, again, depends on a lot of factors there, the population density, life stage, weather at the time. All of these things are going to affect when treatment is going to occur. So the bait, carbaryl bait is the bait that we use. I've got cannibalism can amplify effectiveness. So Mormon crickets, I have so many of these photos and I love them for some reason. Action shot. When a Mormon cricket will ingest this carbaryl bait and it dies from the bait. Again, I mentioned how that forward moves. So if it's going to die, you've got all these adults kind of pushing in. That's a food source for them. They are able to feed on that Mormon cricket. It still has that carbaryl active in its gut, in its tissues, and so they're actually consuming it. I guess that second degree wave of carbaryl bait. IGR, so insect growth regulators. That's listed in the aerial program. Again, going to be used on early instars. It's only going to affect those young immatures. So it's a chitin synthesis inhibitor. It's not allowing the chitin to fully harden once they've moved on to that next life stage. Therefore, they're very susceptible to cannibalism again, which is the elements drying out usually. Okay, so just quick 2025 data. This was all performed right before I got here. So we had just over 2,000 survey sites throughout the state, 151 treatment sites. As far as the aerial treatments were, 87,855 acres were treated. Was this the proposed? Was this protested? Did we propose
Protected versus treated? Yes.
Gotcha. And then total NDA staff. So that was we had 4 full-time employees, 3 seasonals working. I've got a couple of screenshots from our map data, survey data here. So any of these red survey points here are going to be, I believe those are the public.
Red to and greater.
Say that one more time.
Red is 2 and greater.
Red is 2 per yard and greater. I meant the public reporting, the red stars.
Both of the stars are the public reports. The clear ones are ones that we made it to and visited.
Gotcha.
The red ones we never made it to.
Okay, and I hope everybody could hear that. So all of the red stars were from the public reports. The clear ones were what we could not make it up to, but red ones we did. Opposite. Red ones we did not make it up to, clear ones we did. We've got our ground treatments for Mormon crickets. This is very, what did you say, below now? We're not quite zoomed in here. And all of these, I do believe, are available on the live map that you can go look at 2025 data.
Maybe. I've been messing around with it.
will be a feature. Then next, we've got the summary view, and I think maybe Jordan will also go over aerial treatments. So all of these green portions for the aerial treatments performed in 2025. So for this year, again, like I mentioned, all of these variables are going to play a part in our treatment areas. Good news is we've been meeting regularly, and it sounds like we've got a great idea about what we're going to do. I've got on here treatments are limited, right? So the sooner that we are aware of populations, the sooner we can get started on treatment for those areas. We have a pretty short window of hitting those third, fourth, fifth wind stars. So we make sure we're hitting as many of those as we can. Again, we've got this threshold here for when we do those treatments, and that you can see on our, that's what you're referring to, red, right? There are more than 2 crickets per square yard in these red circles. We'll keep the reporting form. We've also got a fact sheet that we could probably share to this. I'll save this on here. I've got another QR code if you want to scan those. So that's our reporting form, and then here's a QR code to our live map. So this is where you'll actually see those points that were on the first survey for this season. Anybody heard anything this year about hatching? Like, we got lucky with snow and
Yeah, I think that's gonna be the way.
I think we were a little worried at first, but yeah. So I'm gonna move on. So this next slide, I've just got my contact information. There's a QR code, and we can probably share the fact that's got all the QR codes and links. So.
Great, thanks, Bryant. We leave that up for just a minute so that folks online can write down any of that information if they need. We're actually going to hold questions until after Jordan gives his presentation with APHIS PPQ. There's some items that he's going to go into a lot more depth on, and so hopefully that will answer some questions, and if not, we'll make sure to have question and answers after that time. So thanks, Bryant, for that information. And we'll turn it over to Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah, break down the video.
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Oh,
And it's kind of heavy, right?
all right. So hello to our virtual audience out there. My name is Jordan Stowski. I'm with the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, based out of the Reno office here. And kind of like Brian was alluding to, I'm going to go over the federal program or the federal side of things for this program. And that would be the USDA regulated or rangeland grasshopper Mormon cricket suppression program. And before I start, I think that word suppression is important because these grasshoppers and Mormon crickets that we're dealing with in this program, they're native species. So we just want to control or suppress them in the years when we're seeing outbreaks and not totally eradicate them. So with that in mind. So this is just a map of the program area. It covers all 17 of the western states. And one important thing to note I have it highlighted there is that all these states draw from the same budget. So depending on how big outbreaks are throughout the entirety of the West, that can mean more or less money for each individual state. And also I want to mention that every state is kind of does its own thing in regards to this program. For example, here in Nevada, we have a really close relationship with the NDA, who does surveying ground treatments for us, whereas in other states, they won't work with any state cooperators. It's just them. Also, not all states are active. For example, California hasn't done any treatments in this program for decades, whereas states like Nevada, Montana have been very recently active. We're also pretty unique here in Nevada that we really just have Mormon cricket problems, whereas most of the other states in the West deal with grasshoppers and can also deal with Mormon crickets. So we're pretty unique in that sense. But just moving on, hopefully these will be covered as I go through my presentation, but these are just some common misconceptions we have for the program. And I'll just kind of read through these. For one, just that the presence of crickets mean treatment. Second, that approval for APHIS to treat, for us to treat, is all that is needed for treatment to be conducted. Third, that treatment is paid for solely by APHIS. Fourth, that aerial sprays should be done consistently if there's crickets around. Fifth, someone's yard's overrun with crickets, we should treat them. And last, that treatments harm sensitive species. So like I said, hopefully my presentation will kind of clear up some of these questions that we get commonly. We get our power for this program through the PPA, specifically section 417, and there's just that little blurb on the right side of the screen. And the vocab in that, I'll kind of go through that next couple of slides, but it says subject to the availability of funds, carry out a program to control grasshoppers and Mormon crickets on all federal lands to protect rangeland. So what does that mean for us? These stipulations, as it said in the blurb there, it's for rangeland only. We don't do cropland or residential areas, anything like that. It's specified rangeland only. Again, there has to be funds available for that year. One big thing is that we have to be requested by the land manager to actually do the treatment, and this could be at any level, be it federal, state, or private. For the most part in Nevada, we deal with the BLM, being that most of the land is under their control. So we get requests from them every year from the 5 districts in northern Nevada, so that we're able to treat any possible infestations on their land in any given year. Another thing is there has to be some kind of economic level. Just the presence of the crickets isn't enough. There have to be enough that could potentially cause problems. And then further guidance on this, as I mentioned, all the states are competing for limited funds. Again, there has to be a damaging population of the pest documented, and treatment would have to provide some ecological or economic benefit. For our aerial treatments, we usually say about 10,000 acre minimum for an outbreak. And usually they're larger, and that's just, we want to make sure that we get as much as the infestation as possible. Any areas of the infestation we don't hit kind of reopen things to reinfestation or outbreak in the future. So we want to try and hit everything as much as we can. And it's kind of tough because as people know, the crickets move a lot. So it's kind of like trying to hit a moving target. I'll go a little bit more into the cost share. Brian kind of touched on this. But as far as federal or tribal rangelands go, APHIS will pay for 100% of those treatments. When you get into state rangelands, we split it 50-50 with the state. And then it gets even more distributed in private rangeland treatments where it's a 1/3 cost share between federal, state, and the private landowner. And then also if we're doing any state or private treatments, those other parties are charged about 16% overhead just for admin fees. And again, we're not doing cropland, and APHIS must be the one conducting these treatments. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, as far as Nevada goes, we mainly deal with BLM land, but there are some instances where We have some smaller private properties in our blocks. If we can get participation from those landowners, that's great. Just because that limits the holes in the treatment block and the potential for reinfestation. I'm just going to go through these real quick, but cooperator requirements. So anybody that wants a treatment through this program, through APHIS, basically you become a cooperator with us. This is a cooperative program. And just because you want treatment and we agree to do that, doesn't mean that you're off the hook and you don't have to do anything. We do require some paperwork. Most important of all, like I mentioned, is the letter of request. And like I said, we get this from BLM, all the districts every year. We do have a template for private landowners to fill out. And that also helps us gather more information on a person's property, such as sensitive sites, hazards, things like that. As far as cooperative agreements go, we have that with the NDA. They do a lot of the work with us here in the state, as I mentioned. And we do also have memorandums of understanding or MOUs with entities such as BLM, Forest Service. We also, not so much in this state, but some cooperation on surveys or just kind of reporting where folks are seeing the crickets, just to kind of help us focus on the correct areas. So surveys probably our most important tool for deciding where we want to do treatments. Begins at first hatch or reports, and kind of as folks touched on a couple of minutes ago, with the snow that's kind of pushing things back for us, which is good. But we have had crickets hatch at ideal temperatures in February, just kind of once that ground temp gets around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when we typically begin to see them hatching. But for Nevada, that's usually sometime in March, and when the survey really gets kicked off. The threshold for Mormon crickets is 2 or more per square yard. We have 2 different surveys throughout the season. In the spring, that's more of our nymphal survey as the crickets are hatching. And that helps us more identify where we want to do treatments in that current year. Whereas treatments later in the year in the summer, those are adult surveys and can help us plan for the next year's survey. And obviously, kind of as I've hinted at, these surveys support the basis for treatments in an area if we think we're going to see any economically damaging populations. And we're doing these surveys on rangeland only. I will just point out on the right side of the screen that map. That's a hazard map that USDA puts out every year. And it's kind of to try and predict where in the West we'll see outbreaks for the next year. So this one's for 2026. All the different colorful areas, those are for grasshopper populations. Like I said, most of the other states deal with grasshoppers. You can see Nevada, the black dots, those are the presence of Mormon crickets. And we usually seem to have the high numbers for that. I won't get too deep into these, but we do have specific requirements that we have to meet. A lot of this work is done by me to ensure that we have everything needed for our program. You can see in the bottom left, I kind of highlighted all these things are critical. So if we're missing any one of the things on the slide, it's highly unlikely that we'll be able to treat. The first thing up there, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. That's probably our biggest hurdle for getting things done and actually getting the program done. The first document is the environmental impact statement, but that's done on a national level. So I don't have to worry about that. And that covers all 17 states. And there's actually a new one in the process of being done currently. Next, we have the human health and ecological risk assessments. One is done for each pesticide. For those, that's also done at a national level. And then finally, the big thing that I have to worry about are the environmental assessments, which are more site-specific, meaning just the state. So I did 4 for Nevada last year. This process can get held up because when we put these out, there's a public comment period. And typically in recent years, environmental groups have used this period to kind of bog down the program, ask a lot of questions, and we have to answer these questions And it can just be a lot, depending on how many we get. But luckily, we completed these environmental assessments last year for the season, and they are good for multiple years. So we won't have to worry about those anytime soon. And then the last thing on there is public meetings, which we're doing now, to get information out there to the public, answer any questions, and just as a way to provide information to folks. The next big thing on there is the Endangered Species Act consultations. We do that with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I will say there's a national document that covers all 17 states. But from year to year, I will consult with the local offices in Nevada just to make sure there's no new species that have been added to the threatened and endangered species list that we have to worry about during treatments. And I also share treatment locations with the Fish and Wildlife Service just to concur with them that everything looks good and we're not going to affect it. But that is done yearly, as I said. And then we just have our usual environmental monitoring, which I think I will cover some more in the next slide. So when treatments are actually occurring, we have our standard operational procedures that we go through. When the planes are actually in the air, for example, we want to make sure that the application rate is proper and that the correct area is being sprayed with pesticide. And also meaning we don't want too much pesticide drift, things like that. We do put dye cards out at sensitive sites, be it body of water, any kind of human habitation, things like that that may be out on a spray block, just to ensure that the spray drift, that the pesticide isn't drifting too far and possibly affecting those resources. We can take water, vegetation, or soil samples if needed. And a big thing when treatments are actually going on is monitoring the weather. Once the wind speeds reach 10 miles per hour or greater, we usually have to shut things down for the day. Just we want the pilots to be safe, first of all, and also to reduce the impacts of drift. I'll talk more about the specific pesticide that we use for aerial treatments. But just for now, I'll say it's a restricted use pesticide, so we don't want to use it around water and making sure there's no rain in the forecast, things like that. And with that in mind, we also buffer sensitive sites, so bodies of water, human habitation, things like that. You can see on the bottom of the slide there, it says a 500-foot buffer for their liquid aerial insecticide. The label only calls for a 100-foot buffer. But our program, we extend that out to 500 just to make sure that we're being cautious there. And then also before treatments are occurring, I mean, usually we're out in the middle of nowhere, just a sea of sagebrush, but ensuring that if there's any human habitation nearby, just notifying people. We also ground truth things before we treat, making sure that no bodies of water were missed. We haven't dealt with any beekeepers, but just to make sure there's no beekeepers around with their hives, or organic producers or anything like that. We want to make sure we're not affecting anything else outside of our program. Let's see. So our methods of treatment, Brian kind of hinted at this as well. We use the reduced agent and area treatment, or also known as RATS. In the middle of the slide, you can kind of see the schematic there for it. So the thought is the plane will fly a swath, the width of the plane. So in this case, it's 100 foot, and spray the pesticide. They will then skip that same length of the plane. So in this case, 100 feet, and leave that area untreated. And then they'll spray the next swath and kind of keep going from there. So in this case, we're treating half of the area. This is beneficial because you're using less insecticide. So things also cost less, and using less insecticide, obviously you're putting less into the environment, which is never a bad thing. This method also gives us still a high percentage control for these populations, up to 80–90%. And again, we're not trying to eradicate them. So it's good that we're still leaving some. And the key thing with this RATS method is that it uses the grasshopper and cricket mobility against them, because they'll be traveling between treated and untreated swaths. And the thought is that in these untreated swaths, It leaves the natural predators, natural insect predators of the grasshoppers and crickets there, so they can also offer some kind of control there. And then you have the swaths with the pesticide that will also treat the crickets and the grasshoppers. Like I said, I'll talk more about the pesticide that we use, but this method requires a pesticide with some kind of residual, and the pesticide that we use offers about a 6-week residual. So any crickets that come into the area within that 6 weeks, they can take in the pesticide, or any crickets in the area that are completing their life cycle and growing will also be affected. I will note in Nevada, we use more modified RATS method. So instead of 50%, we do 33% treatment. So basically we do double skip swaths. Just because out here in Nevada, there's not as much vegetation to cover, and we still see very good control using even less pesticide. So now we're to the pesticides that we use. I'll first cover the aerial treatments first. And with that, we use diflubenzuron. Trade names are Dimilin, Cavalier, Ventrillix. As I mentioned, this is restricted use pesticide, which is why we have contractors flying planes for us that are certified to do so. Also, as I mentioned, we have to avoid water with this pesticide. It's an insect growth regulator and a chitin inhibitor. So basically, it prevents the molting of the nymphs. And in this case, it must be ingested. And because we're relying on the insects to keep growing, once they ingest it, the results are a little bit delayed. And one important thing to note with the timing of treatments is that adults are unaffected by this pesticide. So we have to kind of hit that sweet spot where the insects are in the middle of their instars, or middle of their developing life cycle, for it to be most effective. And as I mentioned, it has a longer residual, about 6 weeks. So we have some pictures there. That bottom left picture is from last year, one of our treatments. You can see the plane applying it pretty low. I think that was in the northeast Elko block. Next, I'll talk a little bit about the ground treatments and our carbaryl bait, which we use. Trade names are 7 and Eco Brand. This is a general use pesticide, so it's pretty safe and no license is required to apply it. It is a little bit more expensive, but it is effective on adults, so it can also be used for late season treatments. Typically, we see this applied for crop borders and roadsides, not over a huge area per se. This one also must be ingested. It's a nervous system stimulant, and it kind of works pretty immediately within 20-30 minutes or so. Can be spread by air, but for this program, the NDA uses bait spreaders on pickup trucks. Just some other little caveats to note. It doesn't seem to be favored as much by younger instars of both grasshoppers and crickets. So we kind of try and aim for that middle life stage as well when they're developing to start applying it. Also, some grasshopper species aren't attracted to it at all. But luckily for us, the Mormon crickets seem to take it pretty well. A couple program pesticides that are recommended are malathion and the liquid carbaryl. And basically, this is just because they're not as selective. For the carbaryl bait, it has to be ingested by the insect. And in the areas that we apply it to, where we have such high populations of grasshoppers or crickets, it's taken up pretty much almost immediately. And the same goes for the diflubenzuron aerial treatments. With it affecting molting insects, it lessens the non-target takes when it's applied. So diflubenzuron and the carbaryl bait, just not as selective. Better for the environment than what was previously used. Nothing is perfect, but definitely a lot better. And then to finish up here, this is just a general program timeline. I've kind of talked a lot about some of these things on here. Color coded it. So on the left in the blue, that's kind of the winter time where we do a lot of the starting planning for this program or for the current year's program. See the NEPA work on there, getting letters of requests in, having public meetings, possibly starting survey. And it was a re-roll in the spring and April. It's kind of getting all the numbers down. So maybe what acreage, or the amount of acreage that we want to treat in what areas. This is also when we start trying to get our contract in place with our contractors. And then hopefully sometime in May or early June is when we're doing aerial treatments. And kind of, as I mentioned, for ground baiting, this can kind of take place throughout the season. And it's good for the late season for adults or any late hatching populations. And then once treatments are done, we have our final paperwork and reports done in the summertime at some point, and usually that'll take us to roll into the next year. So just kind of that never-ending cycle of preparing, getting ready for things, and anticipating cricket outbreak. So with that, I'll just kind of leave my contact info in here, as well as my boss, Peter, who's with me as well. So you have our contact info as well as the NDA folks. At any time, feel free to reach out to us. But then other than that, I think I'll turn it back over to Megan, if you're gonna moderate any questions.
Great, thanks so much, Jordan. Appreciate that. We'll leave your contact information up for a little bit, and then Bryant, and maybe a minute or two, if you could stop sharing your screen, I'll share my screen and show folks online where they can find the Mormon cricket and grasshopper FAQ, the link to the map and the reporting form too, for those folks that may not use the QR codes or have gotten those during the presentation. Is there anybody there, Bryant, in person besides PPQ and NDA staff?
Nada.
Okay, well, we'll open it up to those that are online. If you want to raise your hand or turn your camera on or unmute yourself, we can take any questions that you may have. So I don't see any questions yet. Bryant, do you want to stop sharing your screen for a moment, and I will share mine and show where the links are for folks that are online? Thanks. So you can see here we have our entomology homepage on the Nevada Department of Agriculture's website. If you go to plant and then hit entomology, you'll come up to this site, and at the bottom of the webpage, there are links here. You'll find the link at the bottom in the center for the Mormon cricket and grasshopper FAQ. If you, so that's a PDF that has questions, frequently asked questions on there. The map that Bryant showed screenshots of, which is the Mormon cricket and survey map. And then over here at the bottom of the third column is the report, grasshopper and cricket infestation. And this will link to a form where you will be able to fill out information if you have cited Mormon crickets or grasshoppers, and there's a geospatial component to that too. And those reporting forms really help us with eyes and ears across the state. So you can report on there if you'd like to be contacted by the NDA. It has a life stage, and you can report as often as you see crickets, and you don't necessarily have to be online. If you see something, note where you were when you come back to either your computer or into cell phone service. You can use that geospatial locator to be able to do reporting. Does anybody else in the room have any questions or comments? I don't see anybody online with any raised hands or comments. Okay, we'll give it just, I know it's awkward to sit in silence, but we'll give it just a little bit more time in case anybody does have any comments or questions. We will also be posting this presentation on our Nevada Department of Agriculture's website, on our YouTube, excuse me. And then, like I said, those resources are found on our Department of Entomology's website. We will be touring Northern Nevada to the rest of this week. So
And
we will be in Winnemucca, Battle Mountain, and Elko tomorrow, the 24th, and in Eureka on the 25th. So you're more than welcome to come to one of those meetings as well and have any questions there, or you can email Bryant, Jordan, or Peter if you guys have any additional questions, if you think of things later on. All right, well, I think with that, if we don't have any questions from those in the public, we really appreciate you participating in our meeting today. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the Mormon Cricket and Grasshopper program. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
thank you.